I think the first thing is to understand what mindfulness is. Mindfulness is not mindset. Okay. Mindset is like the kind of things that's more typically talked about in the real estate industry, coaching industry. So that would be like positive affirmations, getting rid of limiting beliefs, what I call kind of a more surface look at what the mind does. Mindfulness is actually understanding how your consciousness functions.
Hey, welcome back to another episode of Eat, Sleep, and Invest. I'm your host, Brian Driscoll, and I'm here with Terrie Schauer. What's going on, Terrie?
Hey, Brian. I'm doing good, and thanks for having me on the show.
Terrie, why don't you give everybody a little background on what you do and what you have going on?
Yeah, sure. So I'm in Montreal, in Quebec, which is the French part of Canada. I invest mostly in my local market here. So, Canada's a bit like the States in that we have provinces, and each province has kind of its own ecosystem. We're special because here the main language is French, and our legal ecosystem is also a little bit different. Think New York and California, and then think we're like left of them. So very tenant friendly, that very social, that kind of thing. So I've been investing for 20 years. And I guess in the last 5, I started kind of getting more into coaching. I wrote a book called The Mindful Landlord because since my main hat is the property management hat, I see a lot of people lose their cool, lose their peace of mind when it comes to dealing with tenants. So I wrote the book kind of to help investors, structure their property management practice as effectively as possible. And then also, some mindset stuff of how can you invest? How can you wear that manager landlord hat without going nuts? So that's kind of in a nutshell.
That is true because there's certain parts, I think certain people are built for certain things. Like I'm a landlord myself. I found that my weakness is I shouldn't be talking to tenants. I shouldn't be renting to them. I rent to the wrong people. So having a property manager in place there is just what works for me. What are you seeing? What are some of the things you have in the book that you're seeing on the mindfulness?
Yeah. So I think the first thing is to understand what mindfulness is. Mindfulness is not mindset. Okay. Mindset is like the kind of things, that's more typically talked about in the real estate industry, coaching industry. So that would be like, positive affirmations, getting rid of limiting beliefs, what I call kind of a more surface look at what the mind does. Mindfulness is actually understanding how your consciousness functions. Okay. And so to give it to you, really in a nutshell, there's sort of 3 levels to that. So there is, the thinking mind, which is the level of the affirmations of some of the limiting beliefs. It's kind of like the blah, 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 the radio that's always playing in the back of your mind. And a lot of us get very attached to that and identify with it. So let's say you're having, you get angry or you're having an anxiety moment. You're having some sort of thought process that's pulling you into the direction of getting frazzled. So that's the level of your thinking mind. Underneath that, you have the level of perception, right? Or the level of pure consciousness. And so that is a thing that in mindfulness practice, we end up calling the watcher. And the watcher is just this presence that is always there as long as I'm alive. And the more time goes, the more you practice mindfulness, the more you're able to identify with the watcher, not with the blah, blah, blah of the thinking thoughts. And then also not with the emotional level, because there's an emotional layer in there in between the two that I like to compare to the weather. So it can be raining outside, it can be sunny outside, it can be snowing. But if I decided that I'm going to go do my 10K run, I'm going to go do it regardless of what the weather's doing. But it's going to create a drag on me. But I have to just decide that those emotions are the tint of my glasses that day. But it's not what you feel that determines your outcomes. It's the actions that you take. So it's really a mindfulness practice in a nutshell is to begin to understand those different levels of consciousness and to be able to move through them so that you're using your mind in the most effective way possible for what it is that you're trying to do. And I have a background in martial arts, have done jiu-jitsu for many years. I have won some championships in that. And if you're doing combat sports, it's so important to be able to, use your mind in the best way possible to help you as opposed to drag you down. And then that transfers really nicely to real estate. So
I heard you won some pretty big championships in the jiu-jitsu.
Yeah.
Yeah. What was it, a worldwide championship or something?
Yeah. I won the World Masters 3 times. So yeah.
That's pretty solid. Yeah. Okay. So let's talk about mindset then. So how does this relate to real estate investing?
Yeah. Okay. Well, very simply, so my book is a lot about the property management angle, and I'll start there and then I'll kind of move out a little bit more to real estate more generally. But I think if there's you started the interview by saying I should not be talking to tenants. So why not? Well, because that's one of the most patience-trying, difficult human enterprises that you can enter into. Like I rushed back to this interview this morning from a building where I have, two people who are going to get eviction notices, and like I had to go check something, and then they were waiting for me and they came out and started yelling. So that's like a kind of a dynamic where you really you need to keep your zen and to be able to move in between the different levels of consciousness and keep your eyes on the prize kind of thing is super important. And that definitely in dealing with tenants, you have to be, very mentally solid to not get rattled. But when you're doing deals that are big enough to scare you, which as you grow at some level, right, we're always trying to kind of get out of our comfort zone. And if you want to be able to navigate, up the food chain of different levels of real estate transactions, there's going to be enough zeros and there's going to be enough situations that you get into where you're going to be a little bit scared. And so, being able to have a very solid, mindfulness practice to be mentally solid allows you to face down that fear and to kind of move through it in a way that, again, keeps the eyes on the prize and doesn't get, either into paralysis or into fight or flight mode. And it's kind of how can you hack your brain so that you're acting effectively and not getting distracted by everything else.
Yeah, that's a really good point too. And I think because you talked about the gurus and things too, like everyone positioning hype, like real estate is not really, it sounds sexy before you get into it, but then it is what it is. It's real estate and it's pretty black and white, Well,
it's pretty black and white until you start dealing with people. And then the thing is, because real estate is it's a very people heavy business. And, we have an office here that I share with a couple of other investors. And a lot of times we take breaks together, we drink our coffee together, and we're like, oh my goodness, would this business be easy if people weren't involved? Because whether it's your partners, whether it's, the urban planners, we have a cold war here with the urban planners. You want to build something. They don't want you to build that particular thing in that particular place. Or, the tenants, it's getting through that human quagmire sometimes that's can really be challenging. And then we're you account for yourself because sure, the other human beings you have to deal with are complicated, but we're complicated. And so you have to manage yourself in the best way possible so that you're not the one scuttling the deal with your stuff.
Let me ask you this. So I have a property manager now and I did my own landlording before. What do you recommend for people to do it on their own or pull in property management, or what do you see on your side?
For people who are starting out, I recommend, when they buy their first small property, if that's the road that they're going, I recommend to self-manage, for 6 months to a year, if possible, if it's in a market that you can do that, just so that you can understand. Because the property manager, if somebody is going to pull the wool over your eyes and not do right by you, the property manager has so much power that unless you really understand what they're doing, on an intimate basis, it's going to be very difficult for you to put the checks and balances in place that are going to show up when there's problems. And so to understand I think what I like to do is, to help people understand what are the incentives. So a property manager, they're charging some kind of a monthly rate. Usually it's a percentage of gross rents, or maybe it's a fixed rate based on the number, the door itself. But it's like insurance. And property managers often have this incentive as a result of how they bill. They have an incentive to just take on a lot of business. And then it becomes the squeaky wheel syndrome. So it's not that once in a while you get dishonest people, but the weakness that I find very often in the business model is that property managers take on all kinds of clients, and then it's just whoever yells the loudest is getting attention. And then, maintenance gets deferred, tenants are not getting callbacks. Sometimes they even fail to follow up. I've worked with, out of my local market when I work with property managers, I had someone who wasn't collecting the rent. And he didn't even realize until I did my bank reconciliation, at the end of the quarter, I'm we're missing 3 months of back rent. And the guy didn't even notice. And it wasn't dishonesty. It's just because he grew too fast and because he's looking at his bottom line and the more clients he can get in the door that he's charging his monthly rate to. When you understand that that's the industry ecosystem, then you have to say, okay, how am I going to insert my checks and balances to make sure that the person's actually doing what they need to do? And, if for somebody who wants to not go the route of self-management, I suggest the more hybrid of a model you can build, the better it is. And so like to be totally transparent, how I run my business, I do invest a bit outside of my local market, but I make the property manager work on my platforms. So I have like, a digital filing system. They have to like put all of the documents into my digital filing system and I give them logins. So that means that should I need to fire someone, like I have access to the data at all times. I know in the US, depending on which state you're in, sometimes like you're not allowed to share everything. Like basically I have a property management software that I force my managers like out of local market to work on. So like I'm really the one controlling the data. I know that's not possible everywhere across the states, but the extent to which you can build hybrid markets and maintain some kind of a contact, like I try to visit my properties, the ones that are not in my local market, 2-3 times a year, go there, sniff around, talk to the tenants, shake some hands, and you will hear what's being effectively handled and what's not being effectively handled. And by sort of creating, the canary in the coal mine, you're able to hear like the tenants, maybe some of them, have a way of reaching you. Maybe they have your email, maybe they have your business phone number. And so trust me, if they're upset about something, it's going to get back to you. And I try to build those checks and balances into my model in terms of how I manage. I mean, we can also get into how to vet a property manager if you want to, but I think in terms of how you run it, the more you can have those metrics, like those little sniff around metrics, the better it's going to go for you.
I think you're right there too, because like even on my side, one of the metrics I have to give them guidelines because they're incentivized to rent the property as fast as possible. So even giving them guidelines on who to rent to, what credit scores, what backgrounds, things like this. You have to keep it the same for everybody, but don't just let the property manager pick your tenants, like section off because it's your properties, And like you're saying too, like I don't do quarterly or anything, but we have them walked annually at least because you want to keep up on your properties and see it. Hey, are they being trashed before you find out 10 years later that you just turned a nice house into a dumpster?
Again, it also depends on your business model, right? Like my business model is I was a property manager first, and then my investment business grew out of that. And so like the way that I make money is by like really solid property management. So like maybe I'm walking the property more often and I'm going to be policing the management side more. Whereas like someone else, their gig might be renos, or it might be some other thing that allows them to turn a profit. For me, it's management.
Yeah. Now let's talk about vetting a property manager. So people are looking for a property manager. What tips do you have on that side? Because how do you tell if someone's good or not?
Yeah. Okay. So the very first thing is make sure that they're competent with the type of property you have. So I'll give you an example. Like there are very good property managers here who only take on like 40 unit buildings. If you have a condo or a single family home, that's not the right person for you. Then there's also portfolio size. So, if you could have like 400 units yourself, then maybe you're going to be given the time of day by one of those very big firms. But if you have, a couple of triplexes or like, 10 single family homes or something, you need somebody who's at your size. And so picking somebody who has thousands and thousands of units, if you're like the flea on the dog, you're not going to get a whole lot of airtime, and they might not be working at the right level for you. So definitely you want to ask about their portfolio. What type of properties do they typically manage? How many properties do they manage? Then, as far as what I like to do is just, call them. And if you call the number that's listed, online or whatever, and then see what is the client experience like. Because if you can't get through to someone, or if it takes you a week to get a call back, realize that your tenants are going to be facing that should they have maintenance requests. And ultimately, if you want to speak to someone there in the organization, you're also going to have a really long wait time. So, test the client experience. Obviously, do the due diligence in terms of, the contract. Like you need to spend a lot of time making sure that you understand how they bill. Because I don't know, maybe like realtors, for example, it's more typical the contract. They'll just take, a piece of commission, a slice of the commission. Property managers is not like that. Some people charge like a smaller monthly fee, but then they're billing extras. And you want to make sure, like, what are those extra? How are you going to get billed for the extras? And at what time, what point do you get notified? Because sometimes they just run up a huge bill and then send you the bill. And you're like, okay, I would have preferred to be consulted on this specific thing. So you need to make sure you really understand the offer and then be willing to negotiate with them. Like for me, the sticking point with my managers who are not in my local market is they have to be willing to work on my platforms. And I have a decent sized portfolio. So like when I go in and say, okay, look, I want to get into this market. I want to work with you. I'm going to grow, but you have to be willing to adapt to some of my systems. And then some people don't like that. So that's going to then immediately bounce that person. Like I want to see that they're willing to kind of work in the way that I'm comfortable with. So that's another thing. And then just in terms of, I think this is pretty self-evident, but word of mouth. So you don't want to just be picking somebody randomly off the internet. It's better if you can get a reference.
So what's the difference between the Canada market versus the market in the US? What do you see there?
Legally, we have a pretty different ecosystem, and our banking is not run the way it is in the States. So we have like quite stricter lending laws, and we have 5 major banks. We don't have like a bunch of small banks like the US does. So on that side, things are a bit different. Legally, basically, we don't have like lawsuits are not a thing up here the way they are in the States. So, we'll have local rental boards where like if you have disputes with your tenants, you're going through the rental board, and like those are kind of small ticket items. And then for everything else, your insurance will cover you pretty much. So like we don't have to worry in residential tenancy. Commercial is a bit different, but we don't have this very litigious environment. And our markets are not following necessarily the same path. So to give you just like a quick background for the last, let's say 5 years of what's happened in Canada, we're currently, or we were during COVID, one of the most indebted and expensive markets vis-a-vis what Canadians themselves can afford. We're also on a crazy immigration path right now. So Canada's letting in as the same number of immigrants per year as the US, so 500,000, and we're the size of California. So basically, like our government has decided that they want to, increase the population of Canada by 25% in the next 10 years. And so that's creating incredible pressure on the rental market. We're also not building. So like we're building, I think 20% of the units that we would need to just keep pace with demand, never mind this additional population pressure. And then all of those people are coming into the major markets. So Toronto, Vancouver, Montreal, like those are the 3 biggest cities in Canada. And we're very urban. We're more urbanized than the US. Like most of our population is in those big centers. And so that means that our rental property values, like there's just this incredible pressure on the rental market. And at the same, we've been on the same interest rate trajectory as the States. So that's made things in the short term maybe not as profitable as they were during COVID. But if you take a 5 to 10 year time horizon, we just don't have enough housing for the people that there are here. And so that's only going to go, the rents and the property values are only going to go one way.
Yeah. And yeah, that is pretty crazy too. Cause you get a lot more people coming in without the houses there. It just drives everything up.
Absolutely. And like, the cycle here is that everyone starts as tenants because we're very urban. And so the immigrants flood into the urban centers, and then they're not coming here and buying a single family home in the suburbs in year one. They're going to spend, 5 years getting their footing and then living in some kind of rental housing somewhere. And so if you're in the rental housing business here in an urban center, you're doing pretty well. And then, for, I don't know how adventurous your listeners are, but for Americans who want to come here with American dollars, the Canadian dollar is very low right now. I think for you guys, it's funny money, like I work with some Americans in the podcast sphere and in real estate as well. And every time I tell them like what our prices are for things, it's like, then I convert it to American dollars and they're like, hee. It's funny money.
It is true too, because that's something interesting to think about. You look at the market, but then you have to look at the currency exchange too, because it changes.
Absolutely. And like for, the American dollar is so high right now. For us Canadians, it's very difficult for us to go across the border. But if you're in any way interested in, real estate business or anything else, if you're looking at, buying big ticket items, I would encourage you to look north of the border because you're going to get a massive discount.
That's a good point. Hey, so we're about out of time. Let me ask you this. Where's the best place people can get your book?
Yeah, so the book is called Mindful Landlord. It's available on Amazon. You just write, Mindful Landlord on Amazon. And if you want to connect with me, my social media of choice is probably LinkedIn. So Terrie Schauer on LinkedIn, or my website, terrieschauer.com. And you can kind of get into my ecosystem that way if you're interested.
Okay, great. And everyone listening too, we'll put links to that in the show notes. You can just go on and click. Hey, well, Terrie, thanks for coming on. We appreciate you.
Thank you so much, Brian, for having me on. It's been great to get to know you in this very short slice of time.
Hey, everyone, thanks for listening. Until next time, get out there, crush it, close some deals. We'll see you guys.